Hey guys, it's Logan here with Hydra 572, and today I'm going to be reviewing the Kershaw Leek. The one I have here is the Blackwash model. I have to say, one of my favorite parts about knife collecting is that even though I've been doing it for a long time, I still get to be surprised from time to time. I was very surprised by how much I fell in love with the Cold Steel Mini Tough Light, and I'm surprised by how much I fell in love with the Kershaw Leek. And I love these two knives for pretty similar reasons, even though they look pretty different. I love them because they're very easy to carry utility cutter knives that could sort of blend into emergency defensive if they had to. The pricing on the Kershaw Leek is about $64 for the Blackwash model on Blade HQ, but you could go down to $45 for the cheapest one, the non-coated model. And that is a pretty high price for this knife, I will go ahead and say right off the bat. If you shop around, you can get them for a little bit lower. eBay and Amazon, you might be able to knock off $10. That is quite a bit of money for a knife this size with these materials. I will say that up front before I talk about how much I love this knife. Moving on to the blade profile, we have a Wharncliffe, but it's not really a true Wharncliffe. It's not straight all the way across. You might be able to see on this model, and you can certainly see on the stock photos offered by Kershaw, especially on the satin finished blades, that we sort of have a swell here and then a little bit of a dip in the blade here. I'm trying to be careful not to cut myself, but maybe you guys can see that. It is not a straight shot all the way across the blade. The tip is very, very, very thin. This is one of the few tips on a knife that I've reviewed that I will say you could easily break this tip off the knife. It's going to provide for some pretty easy tip cutting. Anything acute and in tight that you need to do with the tip of this blade you'll be able to do, but I am worried that if you're using this knife for anything as strenuous even as cutting wood, that you could get the tip to fail relatively far down the blade. I think you could get a big part of this blade to snap off. It is just a very thin stock that finishes at a fine tip. The belly, we have a little bit because of that swell that I'm talking about that comes out to this point, but it's just not very much. Essentially, in terms of not sharpening, which we do have to deal with the swells, but in terms of using the belly, we are essentially dealing with a Wharncliffe. I'm not sure why we couldn't have just gotten a straight line all the way across. I think that would have been easier to sharpen. Moving on to the steel, we have Sandvik 14C28N, and I have to say I was not impressed with this steel in this knife. It did not hold an edge a very long time. It seemed to be very prone, especially with the factory edge geometry, to sort of fold over very early. It seemed like a soft steel that was also prone to folding over. So that was just a bummer. It did not do very well in the cut test that I performed. The sharpening was very easy. Like I said, it was as if I was sharpening a very, very soft steel. That was somewhat bizarre. On the Sharpmaker, I got it back to a hair-popping edge relatively easily. Usually I've said that I like having a steel that's a bit on the softer side, but not this much. This much was during the course of normal use. I found the knife getting dull, and that's pretty bizarre for me. The grind is a partial hollow grind. I'll take you guys in a little bit closer so we can see. And it is a pretty pronounced hollow grind. I will say it looks very, very nice. I think this is a very stylish knife overall. And there we see the deployment. We have the flipper tab with the Kershaw Speed Safe Spring Assist. It is certainly not the best spring assist I've ever seen out of Kershaw. I will continue to hold up as my primary example of a snappy opener. The very inexpensive Kershaw Clash, still one of my favorite assisted opening knives of all time. Very snappy, very weighty, very authoritative. Just a good all-around opening. I like that knife. This knife, the deployment isn't bad. It flips out quick, but it doesn't carry any of the weight or snappiness. It just kind of comes on out, which isn't a problem, but it isn't as much fun to fondle and play with, which is something that you're going to be doing with your knives a lot. We also have the thumb studs here. Those are the sort of blade stop thumb studs that aren't really optimized for use, but you can get your thumb in there. It's not hyper uncomfortable, and it just doesn't take too much to overcome that handle retention and get that spring assist going. And I almost never get faulty deployments. It's certainly not a quality issue, but let's see if we can get one. Yeah, it's just a pretty consistent opener. I mean, if you really hit it into something, you could get a faulty deployment, but that's not going to happen to you 98% of the time. Typically, I don't really like deployment locks, but the tip lock on this knife is actually a really good idea because I have had it disengaged before and had this knife fall out of my pocket onto the ground and go ahead and spring open. So I understand why they added the tip lock. It's not too difficult to disengage. I mean, if you're trying to flip the knife open and it's not working, you can pretty much just use your ring finger, come down here, disengage the lock, flip that sumbitch open, and you're good to go. Moving on to the lock, we have a stainless steel frame lock here. And you guys know that I tend not to like frame locks. Kershaw is just bound and determined to make me like them. And this one isn't really a problem. It's never stuck on me. It's pretty easy to disengage. We have a pretty good little occlusion here to get our thumb in there, disengage. It's ergonomic enough, doesn't chew up your thumb, anything like that. So the lock is just pretty good. Play, we do have too much both ways, up and down, side to side. For a $60 knife, I just feel like we should have a little bit less play than this, but I suppose it's the same working mechanics as a $45 knife, in which this would be a little bit more acceptable. Begs the question of why a finish commands an extra $15, but I suppose it's new. Onto the handle, we have a stainless steel handle. Two good sized slabs of stainless steel. We have a partial backspacer there. I would still call this an open flow through design. You could clean it out pretty easy with compressed air. Wouldn't need to break out your Q-tips and sort of whittle them down to get in there. I think you'd be just fine. The handle material is steel, and it's, by the way, a non-textured stainless steel, which I'm informed that I'm not supposed to like because when it gets wet and cold, it's going to be slippery, it's going to be too hard on your hands. As far as I can tell, when any handle material gets wet and cold, it's too hard on your hands. I've never really bought into that whole thing of, oh, you need texture. You know, I've read in hunting magazines and whatnot before that you never want a metal handle. And the more that I experiment with knives like this and with the Spyderco Bird Flight, I'm really liking the smooth handles. Maybe it's just because it's breaking up the rigmarole of always having polymer that tears up my hands. And I'm not even talking about tearing up my hands. I just mean using this knife for the short term, it feels smooth. It feels nice in hand. So I actually really like the ergonomics of the pretty much polished stainless steel of this handle. The ergonomics are really good with that classic coffin style, just a little spot for you to pinch with your pointer finger and your thumb, and yeah, it's just pretty dang ergonomic. I like this thing. It provides for that really far extended Filipino grip that you guys see me doing all the damn time, and the jimping is there. We have some here on this portion of the blade, kind of still inside the handle. I never use it. I'm always in that extended Filipino grip when I'm using this knife. Very rarely. Even for something like slicing open a package, I won't do this all that often. I just really feel like my hand is strong in that position. So the jimping is essentially useless. I suppose it's nice that they added it, but you know, it is a cost-adding feature as well, so there you go. The flipper is jimped, and that is some pretty good jimping. It gives the smooth flipper some texture that it needs. The clip is two-way reversible, which is a bummer for anyone who is left-handed. This knife is going to be difficult for you to carry in that configuration. If you wanted to flip the clip over, you are shit out of luck. But the clip is very long, which is a big part of what makes this knife very easy to carry. The Mini Tough Light is easy to carry because it doesn't weigh anything. It's a little piece of plastic with a very small piece of steel inside. The Kershaw weighs a little bit more, but since we have this long clip, we can do those things like clipping it outside the pocket without worrying about it falling out. You guys have seen my EDC videos. You know that I like that outside the pocket, left side carry for a lighter utility cutter knife. I understand that a lot of people are going to be using this as their only knife because they want something light and easy to carry, and that's cool, but this knife really works into my system because I can carry it outside the pocket with that super long clip. Also, when it's inside your pocket, it makes it to where it shakes around less. It makes you perceive the knife as lighter. That's pretty nice. And I guess because this is a smaller knife, they don't have to worry about it being too showy. So you can have this big amount of clip outside your pocket and you don't have to worry about intimidating the sheeple. That's pretty nice all the way around. On to presentation. I think this knife is just damn gorgeous. I'm not sure how I feel about blackwash as a finish, but on this knife, it just works for me. It takes a knife that wasn't too attractive to begin with and just makes it a standout. I think that looks awesome. It looks like a nicely finished granite, something like that. It's a great finish on this knife. Quality is good. The deployment could be a little bit snappier, but I'm not worried about it. And the hardware is fine. It's held up pretty dang well overall. I may have tightened the pivot once. Value, I'd really like a nicer steel. I know they made one with a composite blade, so I guess hush my mouth, but for $60, I feel like we could do a little bit better than this. I mean, I felt like the Echelon held up a whole lot better than this, and I forget if that was the same steel or not. I don't know what the issue was, if it was just the edge geometry that they offered from the factory, but this knife did not impress me in my cut tests, and that was a bummer. If you were really looking at this knife and you thought the black wash was gorgeous, I would think about recommending you to go up to the composite. A little bit more expensive, you're almost competing in a different echelon of knives. I threw in another knife reference. But yeah, I would recommend that. I think that's the way to go. That sort of moves us into competition. I think this knife is primarily being competed against by itself with the composite blades, so that you could have a little bit nicer retention, especially if this is going to be your only knife that you're carrying. But also, obvious competition would be the Mini Tough Light. And we know that SOG makes all sorts of things that are light, slim, easy to carry, all that sort of stuff. Unfortunately, I don't have many to show you. Also, if you're not really worried about light, slim, and easy to carry, then this knife has to compete with a whole lot of EDC utility cutters. I mean, tenacious, resilience, all those sorts of things. With $45 or up through $60 to spend, the EDC utility folder market is really yours to explore. There are a lot of great blades. I have my favorites, but I always recommend that people go get their hands on, see how something feels in their hands, see how it feels like it's going to cut. But with all that said, I would emphatically pass this knife. I think this is an excellent knife to add to your collection. You would finally have something for Wharncliffe Wednesday if you were so inclined, and it is just a really cool knife. For me, it passes primarily on being really, really easy to carry. When we get down to weight, we'll see that the weight is 3 ounces. It weighs nothing. Finish up with some specs: overall length of 7 inches, blade length of 3, handle length of 4, and a thickness of 0.09 inches. This is a very slim and easy to carry knife, and I am very much in love with it for that reason. Hope you guys have enjoyed this video. Thank you for watching. Stay tuned for more of the same.